Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show, it's about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the Landscapers finale. Great finale. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So obviously, we're in the courtroom, and obviously, I thought it was so interesting, and once again, I didn't really 100% get, because the whole aesthetic of, we're kind of reliving everything a little bit through the lens of a Western, but in the grand scheme of things, it made a lot more sense as the episode went on, because they're like, right, there's the whole, they bring up the whole point during the trial, like there's the whole thing of like, right, them being kind of obsessed with movies and films and stuff like that, and in particular, Western stuff. It seems like it's more so Susan, but it's like, Chris kind of like latched on to some of that as well, so I'm like, right, so that explains the whole, like, everything going down, pretty much the events of the story, in a much more condensed version happening in a Western style. I thought that was kind of interesting. But obviously, as we're going through the trial and stuff, it's kind of being unveiled, pointing out the inconsistencies with their stories, the evidence of like, right, rigor mortis would have set in like 3 days later or something like that. So it's like the bodies had to have been buried at least 3 days after the murder and not like the week after that they proclaimed. There's no way you wouldn't have noticed the smell, because even Susan tried to go back and was like, oh, I bought like 20 air fresheners. It's like, whoa, you didn't mention that to the cops or anything, but it's just interesting that you happen to bring up this testimony now after we had an expert bring up the fact is there's no way you wouldn't have been able to not notice that smell. Obviously, Christopher, once again, I don't know whether it's just him thinking he's smarter and he's better than everyone. Like that, like he just got so conceited that the fact is of how he handled himself even in the courtroom where like the person that was the prosecutor or whatever was talking to him and she was like, oh, let me finish my question. He was like, you're not even letting me answer. He like cut her off after she cut him off. It's like he's trying to make a point of, obviously, Susan doesn't really like guns. I had the gun and caliber necessary that was used in this case, but I sold that years ago. I was into guns, but it's because I'm into military history, and a byproduct of that is being into guns to some extent. But obviously, they try and like shift and shape the narrative to be, okay, so what choices were yours? Like the whole, buying this thing that cost 2,700 pounds. It was like the actor they like, Gary or whatever. It's like, oh, Gary Cooper, like this was signed by him. And it's like, oh, like he's like, I made that choice because Susan would like it as a gift. And no, we weren't on the verge of bankruptcy. But it's like, it's been one thing after another. It's like, was that your choice? And it's like burying her parents. He was like, it was mutual. But what about you calling Tabitha, your stepmother? Was that mutual, or was that just you? It's like, you must have been going through a great pain if you were going to do that. So they're trying to paint the narrative of, right, you're doing a lot of stuff for Susan, and that ends up being a very heartbreaking thing as Susan's looking on, because she's never realized like how Chris felt about things. Because it's like, right, Chris kind of says like, right, it all became about Susan's life, and mine just kind of faded away. So it's like, right, he did everything, he lived and did everything for Susan. It's like, right, I can never, I had to give up my gun hobby because she didn't like me being away from home. Hell, not even away from her for long periods of time. And it's like, oh, like, and it kind of shows like the narrative of she's very needy and you had to sacrifice so much of your own personal life for her sake. And you see like Susan kind of breaking, like, not even breaking down, but you see like her like with her mouth open and just like almost like watery-eyed a bit, because it's like, wow, like I didn't know I was such a hindrance to you. Especially because the entire time she's been locked up, she just wants to be near Chris, but it's like she has codependency issues. But considering potentially, you know, if it is the truth, which I take it as face value, but maybe that's just, that's why no one else is really going to take it too much at face value. But it's like, I think a lot of her issues with her parents are true. Like her father did abuse her, and her mom did know about it. And her mom and her dad probably did, say terrible things to her. What Christopher brought up about her inheritance, that probably was true as well. And they probably just treated Susan like crap. So that's extra. But it's like, right, Chris potentially did it because he loves Susan so much. And it's not like she has like this complete sway and control over him. But it's like, right, to make her happy, her life is what's more important, because mine is kind of thrown to the wayside, essentially. I do think it's interesting because when Chris and her are sitting in the box, like, you know, while the experts are doing their testimony, she keeps looking towards Christopher. He's staring straight ahead. He won't look at her. He'll make some movements here and there. And even at one point, she looks at Douglas, but Douglas kind of gives her like it's okay, it's okay. You know, the sad thing is in those moments, because I guess, like, truth be told is they can't look or say anything to each other without ever being in contempt. So that would probably, like, worsen things that they did. So Douglas probably gave her the lowdown on that, but. Because I think it's heartbreaking because it feels like Douglas is more for her in that moment than Chris is. But once again, maybe it's just because Chris can't be. But especially his testimony just kind of put the nail in the coffin when it came to this. Especially when it's like, because of the positioning of the bullets, it's like, right, the gun had to be fired by the same person for it to be this way. They still haven't, and I guess we're still going with the narrative of they were laying down when they were shot. Like, they brought that up, and they created that narrative last episode. Not created, but it suggests, at least Lansing kind of made it seem like that might have been the position they were in when they were shot by Christopher, because he's the one that actually pulled the trigger. Because it seems like we're still going with the narrative of Susan isn't good with guns. She's never been a fan of guns. She's quite fragile, and all yada, 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 right? So I think it is kind of pointing all towards, nah, Chris, you're the one that pulled the trigger. Because especially because in that moment, it's like, oh, he shows like, this is what you do. And I thought it was so interesting how that was constructed too, where it's like, and it seems like he shot the judge and everyone's running out the room. And it's like, once again, I guess it's just in like her haze of seeing everything and just rather things be over with. Maybe that's what Susan was seeing. That it was kind of being reenacted like that. Like last episode I brought up, I do believe every time we saw like someone that didn't fit the scene, like someone that's just staring straight at the camera, or when Christopher was shooting the gun last episode and those people were out in the field with him and they're just staring, like I brought up last episode, I believe those are all the people that are on in the audience, the jury of sorts. Once again, I don't know how like the law fully works, because I don't think the court system, it definitely doesn't seem like the court system is the same as, because you see like, oh, the jury's deliberating. That might just be like a U.S. thing. I don't know. Like, I've never watched enough British stuff, like courtroom related stuff, so I don't know how a lot of that works. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of similarities. The wig thing still throws me off. I'm like, oh yeah, because I think that is still that is a thing, isn't it? Unless I'm mistaken. But I'm like, that kind of throws me off. But I don't, like I said, I don't know the ins and outs of all the aspects of the courtroom. I touched on it a little bit, but let's circle back to the Western aesthetic. I did think it was interesting how, like, once again, it's like, it's a much more condensed version of the story, because Christopher left a note for Tabitha. Tabitha gave that note to the cops, and it ends up being, Wilkie and Lansing and the other dude chasing after him with a whole bunch of other cops. This is the Western, so it's like horseback, guns firing. I do like, once again, it cuts back and forth in conjunction with the trial, because the moment the expert was talking about how the body would smell, we're cutting to them, in the Western aesthetic, like disposing of the bodies, and it's just like, oh, the smell is horrendous, and then burning the bodies instead of burying them. But they eventually ended up getting the authorities caught up to them, and in that moment it turns into a shootout. Christopher's like, no, go, I'll hold this off. But then Susan's like, no, how did they find us, Chris? And he's kind of like, I'm sorry. And she decides, like, what, screw it, I don't care what happens to me next. So she goes straight up firing. She gets winged. Luckily, Chris ended up shooting the last person that was Lansing, and but he bails afterwards, and that kind of coincides with him kind of throwing her under the bus, of being like, right, it became more about her life and less about mine. And just in that moment, like I said, aesthetically, how it just feels like it's kind of representative of how Susan's playing things out in her own head, like it's a defense mechanism. But when it was time for her to get on the stand, she's very soft-spoken, and she's stuttering a bit. And it's like, right, she talks about the casings. They're like, yeah, but the gun you use in particular doesn't have a casing. It's like, right, I guess you and your husband should have, like, come up with a better, like, lie and stuff like that. But she's like, no, I saw the casings. I'm like, I don't know if that's a thing of she's been telling this story to herself over and over and over and over again for the past 15 years, and it's, like, gotten warped, because once again, like, when you remember something, you're only remembering the memory of it. So it's just like, she's been telling herself the same lie for so long that she starts to believe it herself. Or it's like, the only way I'm gonna be able to convince people to believe it is if I believe it. So you kind of force yourself to believe it. But it might, like I said, it might just be like she's playing because she tells us about like right while we covered him up in the duvet or whatever was because I didn't want to see them. It's like, oh, didn't you think about saving your father? It's like I didn't even want to. I just assumed he was dead because I didn't want to look at him. And it's like, oh, like if you shot your mom, it wouldn't have been like some like hesitant squeeze. You would have, with the nature of the gun, you would have had to put some effort and like intention to pull that trigger. It wouldn't have just been some casual like, oh, hair trigger thing. It's like, no, you would have definitely had the intent to squeeze super hard to get those shots off, making it seem more premeditated than it is. Than what she claims, because she kind of made it seem like it was a crime of passion, almost just in that moment, just emotions flare, bam, bam, pull the trigger. It's like, no, it kind of seems more like it was premeditated, like you planned out, or, you know. But once again, trying to say like, oh, maybe it wasn't you, maybe it was Chris. And then, like, she jokes about, oh, but you are fragile after a while. Do we need to stop? Because it was heartbreaking to see her just kind of stammering on over her words. And then a moment, like, the prosecutor was saying that, and then, like, the people in the jury of sorts start laughing, too. And she's like, go ahead, laugh. You can't hurt me. I'm already, I'm not fragile. I'm broken. It's like there's nothing you or anyone else can do to hurt me anymore because I'm broken. So you can laugh at me, you can say all this in front of all these people, make me feel like dirt. And you can even see Douglas feeling bad for her. And you seeing her tearing up, I was like, Jesus, I'm like getting like misty eyed a little. I was like, oh my god. And just like seeing Susan turn back and you see like the tears drop on her face, you're like, because she turns to Chris at one point in time and he feels bad because it's like, right, I said all that stuff to you, not realizing, like, not knowing how much my words were hurting you, you know? But for her, it's like, yeah, because they also try to paint the narrative of, like, right, your parents, they were good people, you did this to such people, because they're not here to defend themselves. But that's also the thing for her, it's like, why are you defending these terrible people? Like, they were terrible to me. And at that point, that's kind of where we left things at courtroom-wise. But I did like that sit-down between... Well, because Douglas, you could see, like, in his mind, he was kind of, like, sitting on, like, a bench. And this all weighed on him. So he went to go see Susan. And he actually talked to her for a little bit. He was like, I get you, Susan. He's like, I don't know why, but I do. Because she's like, can I tell you something I haven't told anyone? I don't think it would have been important to tell anyone. So she ends up confirming what I wondered last episode, and the Gerard Depardieu, like, letters that Chris was receiving, she's the one that wrote them. Like, she did send them to him, but when he didn't write back, she pretended like he did. Like, she learned to write like him, created like mistakes, like it would be someone who naturally speaks French and trying to translate stuff to English, which struggled. So like there'll be spelling errors and stuff, and so she like worked on his signature, all for the sake of Chris. Which even Douglas is like, man, that's beautiful. Like, that's really sweet and touching, you know? He's like, it's actually a good thing that you didn't bring it up in court, because I see that as a sweet thing, but they would have just used that as an excuse. She's like, right, the painting in there that we're bad guys. Like, yeah, like, anything that's weird or, like, like, because it's like, it would have it would have created a thing of, like, oh, you're willing to go that far. Like, it probably would have also created the narrative of, you're willing to go that far for Chris, who's to say he wouldn't have done the same thing for you, because he, you know, as Tabitha already made it clear that he had the need to fix people, to save people that were kind of broken. But failing at it a lot of times is kind of like the narrative she tried to create, and he pushed back on that notion last episode. But whether they believed him or not, that's a whole other question. But because the thing is, Gerard is like, despite what people say about you, like, the fact of the matter is, what you went through was a rough deal. Like, the fact is, you know, they should have protected you. Her parents. It's like, you were 7-year-old. A 7-year-old is only this tall. You know, no matter how this situation goes, he does say, like, I wish I'd done more. She was like, no, it's okay. He's like, no, like, I did try my best. I promise you I did. But I will take this experience. I will keep it with me for the rest of my life. Because it's like, you know, once again, it's like, he felt some kinship with Susan. Because he, like, when spending his time with her, it's like, right, you're not even a bad lady. Like, it's contributing circumstances. Yeah, you did this stuff, but it's still like he feels bad for her, because it's like he humanizes her a lot more than maybe other people are willing to. And so he's like, I'm going to carry this experience with me. And then they even shake hands and kind of laugh a little. And I'm like, I think it's a sweet and beautiful, touching moment. But when the time comes, they both are sentenced, because they think Chris is the one who actually pulled the trigger, but it's like, there's no way you two were involved in this in its way. Because I think they were suggesting, like, Susan left the home and then came back. So it's almost like there's no evidence to back up her claims against her parents. So it just seems like, once again, that they were greedy and just like ill motivated. It wasn't like some retribution, like, oh, your parents really were abusive to you. Because even partway through the trial, you even see Lansing's face, and it seemed like I brought it up last episode too, it seemed like she wasn't as gung-ho about this. At first, her and Wilkie are sitting beside each other like, oh, we got, just like, oh, this is that. But I think after Susan's testimony, it like struck a chord with her. And they both get sentenced. I didn't talk about it either, but at the beginning of the episode, I don't know at what point she wrote that letter, but we got that point of view where she was like, right, dear Chris, I don't know when this is going to get to you, but I wanted to write to you. We probably won't see each other for a long time, but I needed you to know that I love you, but I understand. There was never really a place in this world for me. What's the difference between here and somewhere else? In my head, there is no difference. But you belong to this world, and it's just kind of like, I kind of took that from you. When I made you a part of my life, I kind of, like, your chances of being a part of the world, I co-opted you. I kind of took you and just kind of separated you from the world. I kind of made you part of my world and my world alone, And she's like, I do apologize for that. So it's like, yes, I love you, but I understand why you basically have to do what you do. Like, he semi-turned against her. He never fully did, but he didn't. Because his thing has always been like, oh, his job is to protect Susan because that's his wife and he loves her. And he even parted away the comments, like at the beginning, he was like, I married her, and that was my choice because I loved her. Like he said it in the past, and he was never like, I loved her and then still love her. It's just kind of like, he almost made it sound like he stayed because he kind of had nowhere else to go. That's that's the positioning he almost kind of created. But circling back to the Lansing thing really quickly, she actually talks to Wilkie about it. It's like, oh, it's kind of, after dealing with like, this whole case for the past couple of days. Lansing kind of comments on the fact, because he was like, Wilkie was like, I can't even imagine killing my parents. And she's like, I threatened my dad once. And it's like, what? It's like, yeah, after one time he went after my mom, I threatened him. I got an axe and I was like, if you touch mom again, I'll cut off your head. And it's like, how old were you? She was like, I was 12. And he's like, what did your dad do? And she's like, he left. So, because she called her dad up, but I guess that adds to more to why she was talking about. Because, yeah, she knows what it's like, because she's threatened her dad. She never acted upon it, but she knows, like, when you kind of go through something, what will make you kind of want to do. And I do appreciate that Wilkie tried to be there for her, try to hug her. She's like, what the fuck? She's like, don't fucking hug me? Like, the fuck you doing, you twat? He's like, what? No, I'm sorry. And she's like, oh, don't hug. You pervert? He was like, man, fuck off. I was just trying to, like, hug you and stuff. And she's like, no. Like, it's like, oh, like... And it turns into a whole little thing of like, yeah, you ask me out or something like that. And he's like, well, what if I asked you out? It would be something like this. And she's like, no. She's like, theoretically it would work, but I'd say no. And it's like, oh, we should go to a bar and stuff like that. And it's like, you'll be my wing. He's like, fucking wingman? It's like, yeah. Because she's like, yeah, we don't have to talk and drink. I'll have sex. Not with you, of course. So I like their little back and forth. It was kind of like this sweet levity. Despite everything, but I think it was also kind of a defense mechanism considering, like, right, she opened up, but he was like, yeah, I was just trying to be there for you in that moment. But I thought it was sweet at the end. She did get her letter at the end, and it was from Chris, and he signed it Gerard, because she was wondering, she's like, oh, he probably never knew, and that confirms he did know. He always knew what she did, and he appreciated it, and he loved her for it. And I loved him saying, like, right, you were never the problem. I was the reason why I was kind of cut off from the world. That wasn't on you, that was on me. So he kind of apologizes for, I think, a lot of the conversations and the way things played out in court. So it was actually sweet. And then, like, the room kind of breaks away and Christopher's there, Because at the same time, we cut back to the Western stuff and they're, like, pulling off, like, the wigs and everyone. I was like, at first, I couldn't tell aesthetically what was going on, whether it's like, okay, these are the actors themselves. All right, okay, and reset, people, we're done. It's like, all right, and everyone's kind of taking off. Oh, that's the characters themselves of, like, Chris and Lansing and Wilkie and Susan all like playing the Western roles. Like, I don't know how meta that was. But at the end, Christopher holding out his hand to her, I was like, oh, this. I was like, oh, I was like, is this more fourth wall breaking? But it's like, no, because this is going with the film aesthetic because that's why it has had the aesthetic it has had, like with the breakaway walls, and just like how stuff was like filmed last episode. It's because of the filming aspect of it, how they use like film like locations and set pieces as kind of like a framing device for telling a story in certain regards. But yeah, the moment they get on the horse, I was like, what she brought up last episode about like, being on the horse with him, thinking about being on a horse. Could we see a little girl, and that's supposed to be a young Susan with, she talked about talking to her horse, Susan, and she talked about wanting to be on an empty plane, like running on top of a horse with Chris. And it's like, oh, and then what? She's like, no, we just keep riding. And that's what we get at the very end. And it was like, oh, it's really beautiful in its own right. It's it's kind of a sad ending because also, like, once again, knowing the truth. Once again, they are also adding a lot of flair, and this is based on true events. Obviously things have been changed, like whether this is real insight from the real Christopher and Susan, this is just them taking artistic liberties, whatever it is, it does make you feel for them, because it does come back to being kind of like, I brought it up and I felt like, the show might have lost it a little bit just because of things going on between Christopher and Susan, but it kind of gained back some of that love, because it was like, always, I loved you, always have and always will, and then said Gerard, but I was like, there was like, I did like that the theme of like, yeah, this being some interesting love story, and I think it kind of, it's just a nice 4-part thing of just aesthetically how this was shot, how it was done, the thematics of just like the filming thematic, while also like this being essentially almost like a Romeo and Juliet-esque story, and having this romantic love story at the center of it, I thought was kind of interesting. So, just a really nice, well, like I say, keep saying nice story, but it's a sad story because, once again, the only bits I know about the real life thing are the elements they've included at the end of the episodes. That's my only experience with the real life crime itself. But just from storytelling purposes, I think it wouldn't. I don't know whether it makes it sadder to know that this is a real story. Maybe on some level that does make it sad, annoying, but because once again, Susan's sides of things, like, is that her being truthful, is just some lie? Because once again, they still, they've got like a minimum of 25 years in prison, and it's like still to this day they proclaim their innocence. I don't know. From a storytelling purpose, it's a bittersweet ending, but it has a sweet element to it that they are writing off forever and never, and we're forever intertwining together. So there's some sweetness to it. Once again, without the theme of what the nature of the story is, like, it'd be even sweeter. It'd just be a nice love story if it wasn't for the fact of, like, right, this is associated with a murder they committed 15 years ago and covered up. So, but yeah, like I said, it's just a nice ending. Once again, I wasn't expecting the show to be this short, only 4 parts. That threw me for a loop. And like I said, I typically don't end up watching stuff this short, but still, it was a nice experience, nice show. Like I said, I liked a lot of how they went about constructing this show, but cast and crew, wish them the best of luck on their... Once again, it's just so weird because I never get to this point of the conversation so soon, and that's kind of throwing me for a loop. But like I said, I wish everyone involved some... I wonder I would hope this gets some award nominations or something like that. It'd fall in like a limited series category, but I'd be curious. Once again, like, this is me seeing, like, I was like, oh man, because I've never seen Olivia Colman like go all out like I don't know if I'd even say this is her going all out, because other people are like, you idiot, look at The Crown. I've never watched The Crown. Like I said, this is my first time, other than like Fleabag, that was more in a dark comedy show. This is very like dramatic and just like has comedy elements to it, but it's just like, she really made me feel for this character, and just her and the writers and the directors like kind of made you feel something from so to be able to invoke that kind of emotion, I think everyone just nailed it all across the board. I don't know what else to really say. I guess that's really all I want to say. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. good day and goodbye.